Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff operations officer, assisted the national security team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the vice commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
The military profession, at the end of the day, is about people. And the primary difference between success and failure on and off the battlefield has historically been about the human. It's been about the human, not about the hardware. I believe you can primarily attribute any success that we've had in the battlefield in our history to the actions of individual sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines. Their willingness to go out day after day and do what must be done has made the difference. And that willingness didn't come from doctrine, techniques, or new weapon systems or equipment. The will to endure when the mission is tough, the willingness to put yourself at risk, to put the needs of your wingmen ahead of your own, all that comes from intangibles. A World War I Marine described those intangibles as such things as regiments hand down forever. And of course, I'm referring to qualities like courage, honor, commitment, loyalty, and selflessness.
Defense reformers, we need them. We need them to fix the leadership in DOD, fix the classification systems across the United States government, starting in DOD, and fix the acquisition system. My goodness, we are live here on the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube and X-Spaces simulcast and Truth Social, folks. So go follow us over there at Rob Maness and at Worldview Tube. The United States faces a crisis that should result in declarations of emergency conditions, but we will not. Our citizens no longer trust the so-called leaders in our government. All one has to do is read the comments on any random post about drones flying over highly sensitive infrastructure and installations to realize how dire the situation really is. Trust and confidence in our military leadership can be restored the fastest if we have the courage. The video you just watched is from before the disastrous Biden Defense Department. Not that long ago. And those leaders still exist. We just need to get them back on the job and give them the policy tools they need to get the job of providing lethality to America done. But leaders alone can't get it done. Our military and civilian classification systems for creating the most secret information are being abused and misused in a way that harms our citizens and creates a vast corruption apparatus across the entire United States government. Without strong reformation in both of these areas, we will not be able to do what needs to be done in the most broken area of the Department of Defense from a policy perspective, and that is in the area of acquisition. We must address the acquisition system from our manufacturing base to the glacial processes that drive us to not be able to field new equipment within 2 decades of development. We are behind our adversaries because we have turned away from our greatest strength, America's industrial base. Well, 2 weeks ago, we debuted the rank and file effort that has proposed a list of appointment candidates ready to answer the call of duty of reform in the Trump administration Department of Defense. And one of those Americans is my guest today. Retired Navy Captain Richard Chip Whitfield, a former MH-60R wing commander, a squadron commander multiple times, and Navy staff officer, is here to discuss his ideas to address these issues. Chip, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob. I can't express the honor I felt when rank and file put my name on their list. I'm generally a pretty private individual, but this is one that's too important.
Yeah, I share your view. Quite frankly, it is very important, and I appreciate your willingness to come out of retirement, so to speak. Although you're a little bit less into retirement than I am, I think.
Yeah, I was fortunate. Yeah, I was fortunate when I left that one of our defense companies in the industry actually they approved all their COVID vaccination religious requests, and they hired me as an engineer. So I've been working for the last couple of years in some rapid development projects that have been pretty fascinating, pretty awesome to be a part of.
Yeah, so Chip, just as far as your background goes, tell the folks how you ended up on this list and what you went through, because like many others, you have gone through these last years being on active duty for at least some of it, and your experience has really led you to here.
So yeah, thanks, Rob. It's been a weird road. When I took over command of my wing in 2020, it was the very beginning of COVID. We had gone from having 6 COVID patients across 2,600 people to having 0, and then overnight it started to balloon. This was prior to any mandates, any vaccines. CDC had new guidance every day coming out, and every operational commander was trying to figure out what the best thing they could do was to continue carrying on their mission. For our perspective, where I was, we were basically deployed across the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf and the Arctic Circle, chasing submarines and protecting the Atlantic seaboard and carrying out the Department of Defense's guidance and orders. At the time, we shut down. Everyone took a couple of weeks off, but we couldn't. I believe that year in the middle of COVID, my wing ended up deploying 125% of what it was resourced or planned to do, and we were making hodgepodge detachments as Russian submarines sat off the coast. It was a very interesting time. I will say that it was also a time where a lot of major commanders, so aircraft carrier commanders, other air wing commanders, we were struggling with how to deal with the risk and where the risk decisions lay. In the big scheme of things, most of our doctors, I learned we had some doctors that still practiced medicine, but a large number of doctors that practiced administration of policy and procedure more than they practiced medicine. And it was the doctors that came through and helped me manage the risk to decide who we sent out that was key. In the middle of all that, my wife and I, we have a few kids. We also discerned that that God was calling us not to take the shot for various reasons that I don't know it's worth getting into, but let's just say they were religious, and we felt that God called us to make that decision. And I called my chain of command and I told them what was going on. And my boss was the 2-star admiral in charge of all the air forces on the Atlantic Fleet, and he was shocked at what I told him. And he asked me if this was the hill I was going to die on. I said, if I have to, I will. And he said, okay. And he didn't take me out of command. He didn't stop anything. Even in the middle of it, when the Secretary of Defense at the time mandated masks for all unvaccinated service members, we did it for about 2 weeks. Vaccines still weren't mandatory. And at one point, I called my boss, the 2-star admiral, and said, sir, this feels very Star of David-ish. I've got half my force are dejected. They're looking at the ground. They don't want to be here. And it's dividing my force. And he told me point blank, he's like, that's why you're the major commander. Do what you need to do. I was like, I'm telling them to take their masks off. And he said, you're the major commander. Do what you need to do. And we did. And we kept fighting. The ironic part out of all of that, when we got to the end of it and the vaccines became mandatory, less than 1% of my wing hadn't gotten the shot. It was surreal. What I told my CEOs at the beginning of the COVID, when it was personal choice time, was, hey, right now, if you treat your sailors like adults, when it becomes mandatory, they will be heroes. I didn't proselytize. I just protected the individuals that had religious religious convictions. Protected everyone for that matter. And when it became mandatory, most of our sailors had discerned, made their decisions, and almost had 24 people out of 2,600 that put in religious requests. They were all denied, obviously, and every one of them, to my knowledge, is still in the Navy today. So that was pretty remarkable. At the end of the day, I retired, or I got the exact same form letter denial from the Navy head of the personnel, and then, but I got it 2 weeks after my change of command and 2 days before Christmas of 2021. And I was informed when I got it that I had 4 calendar days, not business days, to appeal to the CNO or be found derelict. So, I had a half a work day and the weekend over Christmas. It was awesome. 2 weeks later, I put in my retirement, and it was approved. It was approved in less than 36 hours, and I got a TAP PowerPoint to expedite my transition out of the Navy. I don't regret any of my time in the Navy. There's a lot of great sailors, and quite frankly, there are a lot of great general and flag officers that I still think today. I feel sad for some of the men and women that I looked up to, that I feel like sacrificed awesome careers to become political hacks. But in the big scheme of things, I think the heart and soul is still there, and it just needs people to step up and help it stay on that course. And if I'm asked to do so, I'd be honored.
Yeah, that's why I showed that opening video and asked you to talk about it, Chip, because you revealed, as every one of these stories reveals, there's usually one individual in command, in the chain of command, that has a little flicker of that bright light. I retired in late 2011, just after the command from the Air Force Chief of Staff to all wing commanders said, "Hey, don't talk about your religion in any way whatsoever, in any capacity." So that was the very beginning of the wokeism, the DEI, the ideology, that kind of stuff that came down. And I was leaving, fortunately. But there are a lot of men and women still in that really can lead and will lead. Well, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. When we come back, we'll see another little video. I think it's the one on classification. But I want to talk to you about your ideas to restore trust in our leadership, because it wasn't at your level, it was above you, that we need to work on, I think. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show, talking with a rank and file selection for an appointment in the Trump administration in DOD. We'll be right back.
You need a 24/7 declassification office, whatever you want to call it. Transparency, truth, whatever, I don't care. Sits in the White House, reports directly to you, and you take incoming from the United States of America. I want JFK. I want the 9/11 files. I want this. I want that. All the FBI, and this is a tool, this is something we didn't cover. What the deep state uses the most to cover up their corruption is an illegal application of the classification system.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Transition Tuesday, and we're talking to one of the rank and files chosen leaders that they would like to see get an appointment in the Secretary of Defense's office or one of the services, retired U.S. Navy Captain Chip Whitfield, about his ideas on what needs to be done. And who you just saw there was Kash Patel, the FBI director nominee. but I wanted to show that clip because he puts it very succinctly about the problem with the classification system. And after we're finished talking about Chip's ideas on restoring faith in our leadership at the highest levels in the Department of Defense, I want to get his take on what needs to be done, because it's a lot deeper than just in the FBI. It's really deep in the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies associated with the Department of Defense. And we have some work to be done there. So, Chip, welcome back. I don't know if you saw this on the leadership issue, but reporting yesterday that more than half of Army senior officers, and they mean lieutenant colonels and above, are turning down command consideration. That is, I know in the Air Force, and I'm pretty sure in the Navy, Army, Marine Corps too, at the battalion and squadron command level, I mean, that's everybody's dream job that wants to be a leader in the U.S. Armed Forces. And it's that level of command that 50% of the Army officers are turning it down. I mean, that just, I wanted to get your take on that.
I'd like to say I'm shocked, but I'm not. One of the themes of the past decade of leadership in the general and flag officers is most orders that come down these days are have historically been nebulous enough that the all of the risk of the first interaction on that order comes down to the 05 at that first tour command and his decision. I mean, you see it time and time again in history where the 05 makes the decision, pushes the button, takes the individual to non-judicial punishment or something like that, and we wait to see how the media reacts. And then once the media reacts, then the senior leadership form their opinion and talking points in a way to allay the fears and quench the wrath of the media, and in their minds, protect the service. I think that's right. We've been seeing that a lot, and I think that's a large part of why that faith that senior leadership has got that first tour CO, commanding officers back, battalion commander, squadrons commander, CO. It's not there right now, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what that shows, is that the men and women that are coming up for the most coveted command in the military service in the United States anyway, are looking at senior leadership and going, y'all don't have our backs. I'm not going to take this risk. Yeah. They're actually making a risk decision. That's they're not averse to risk, but they're making a risk decision based on the reality. So I guess my question to you is, say you get asked to be an assistant secretary of the Navy or in the SecDef, OSD, or one of the other services, because I could see you as an assistant secretary in the Air Force too. What are your thoughts on and ideas on changing policy to restore that faith in especially in our senior leadership, because that's where it's got to be rebuilt?
So, it goes without saying that the accountability commissions and everything that Congress is talking about right now, I think there's a place for that, and they should keep going. I'm going to try to keep my comments to looking forward and things that we can do moving forward. I do think all of those things need to happen, and I am not suggesting they don't happen. I think accountability is a life lesson, and it's something that teaches all of us something. So I definitely think that belongs. But I'm going to share an anecdote with you that one of my admiral mentors through all of this shared with me, and it goes into one of the first things that I'd want to do. And one of the first things I'd want to do is I think before you take an 07, so an admiral command, your judge advocate and you need a rigorous constitutional training session, preferably from the Supreme Court, one of the Supreme Court justices. I think we try to do that now, but I don't think it focuses on the Constitution and making sure that our senior officers understand the Constitution and its implications. The anecdote that was shared with me was that during new flag officer training, one of the steps is to sit down and talk with a Supreme Court justice. And the Supreme Court justice asked this. I'm going to say it was 16. I believe it was somewhere between 16 or 20 brand new admirals. How many, show of hands, how many of you have read the Constitution of the United States of America? And only 2 people raised their hand. The Supreme Court justice says, well, that's odd. You've all spent 30 to 35 years in an oath defending with your life that Constitution. It's only 16 pages. Really? You haven't read it? the gentleman that was speaking, the admiral was speaking to me, is like, it was embarrassing, Chip. The fact that most of our admirals and general officers throughout the COVID pandemic, I think they lost touch with that. I heard a lot of times people saying that, we take an oath to follow orders and obey the Constitution. I was like, officers in the military, armed forces, do not take an oath to follow orders. They take an oath to defend the Constitution, period. And if you don't know that Constitution, you have no business being in a position. The only leverage a commissioned officer in the armed forces has against tyranny or laws that are not lawful is to lay down their commission and walk away. We should have seen a lot of 4-star generals do that, and we didn't see any. There was not a single admiral in the Navy that I'm aware of that got out because he didn't take the COVID shot. There's not a single one. I saw many of them go out of their way to defend religious freedom, but none of them put their foot down publicly. And I understand the circle and the wagons, but that wasn't okay. So first thing I would do is I'd establish that. The next thing I'd do is U.S. officers in the military, period, you take an oath to the Constitution. If you violate a U.S. citizen's First Amendment rights, freedom of religion in particular, you should be liable in a civil court. I'm sorry. I understand that if a general or an admiral, an officer acting in their office in the armed services makes a decision that's wrong, that the Navy, the Army, basically Department of Defense owns that liability because they are a direct representative. I think that our officers across the DOD would take their oath to the Constitution a lot more seriously if they knew it better, and if they were liable civilly, even if it's just partially. They have 50% of the liability with the government when it comes to First Amendment rights. And then I would try to do some other things that, quite frankly, are probably a little bit softer, but the things that build up the service. Not a lot of people. The Catholic priests, once upon a time, every diocese in the country had a 1%. They provide 1% of their priests would be part of the armed services in the chaplaincy. Today, I don't even think that number is at 30. You could triple the number of Catholic priests in the Navy today, and you still wouldn't have half of what you had 30, 40 years ago. And I use that as just because I happen to be Catholic. But the reality is there are other faiths that our service members practice that they're sincere about, that their faith is not it doesn't really work well with the chaplaincy corps and the armed services. We need to reach out to those faith-based organizations as a Department of Defense and find ways to help our service members grow in their own faith. If they're good with their own faith, they're going to take better care of their families. Quite frankly, they're going to be more grounded, and they're probably going to be more dedicated to the Constitution of the United States of America.
I have to agree with you. When I left the Air Force, I was a wing commander and had a chaplain's office working for me, and all of our Catholic personnel were civilian contractors. We did not have a chaplain in uniform that was Catholic, which surprised me because I'm an Air Force brat, so I grew up in base chapels, and most of the chaplains were actually Catholics. I mean, they would do. I probably shouldn't say this, but they would do Protestant services because I was an altar boy, and I did services across the spectrum, working with the chaplains, no matter what the denomination was, even Jewish stuff. I helped assist folks with.
Well, I grew up Southern Baptist, Rob. So I saw both. Something about a priest in the chaplaincy makes everybody up their game a little bit.
I like that. I'm glad I heard that from you, because that's important that stuff get taken care of, because as we heard in the opening video, this stuff isn't about machines. It's not about even software. It's about the humans that operate it. That's how you win. If you don't take care of the humans and make sure they're able to do this job and make the best decisions possible, you don't win. And I think we've seen that. We've seen that play out in real life, and it cost American lives. Let's talk about this classification system, Chip. I know you sent me some stuff on ITAR. Tell folks what ITAR is and how you link that with classified material, and why it's important from a military perspective, why we get this stuff fixed, man.
Well, so first of all, I think so the international trade in arms and regulations by itself is it's a giant bureaucratic. Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's horrible. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to our other country partners. It's so obfuscated, and the bureaucracy built around it. You can never get a straight answer, but you're always at risk of getting in trouble and violating it. They shut your whole corporation down as a result of it, and you have no idea that you've done anything wrong. Yet we have all of these treaties with, AUKUS. I'll use Australia as a perfect example. There's no reason we shouldn't be sharing stuff with them. At one point, I remember just being on staff, people would jokingly say, "Oh, we can't share that with the Aussies." Well, mark it secret. That way we can share it with the Aussies because it's okay according to presidential executive order, and we're in the DoD. And the Department of State doesn't give that luxury to any small businesses or industry for that matter. But the entire security classification apparatus across the board, sometimes I wonder if China invests in it to just up our bureaucracy. Our bureaucracy is their number one weapon against our country. It is impossible to get things cleared to send to our partners. And it's embarrassing when you need to. The levels of bureaucracy that are involved, the levels of stovepipe administravia that are involved, makes it impossible to get into the business of defense. It keeps innovators out of defense because if you don't have the security classification, you're out. And then it throws up huge barriers to put stuff together. I mean, the F-35 is a great product, but and they've done a great job. I think the majority of the effort on the F-35, I'm being humorous at this point, but the majority of the effort of the F-35 was to break down the cross-domain classification solutions so that multiple countries could talk to each other and multiple companies could talk to each other. That was probably the biggest feat they accomplished. Now, I do say that tongue in cheek. There are some magnificent technologies that are, represent American ingenuity, but the fact that it took as long as it did just to get the security piece solved is ridiculous. The video clip that you played at the beginning is point blank that the bureaucracy needs to go away, and it needs to be very quick, 24-hour clearance, and you should be able to give certain American citizens clear guidance on how to handle secret to top secret to every. Yeah, we make it too hard, but I think we make it too hard because it's become a job program for bureaucrats.
Yeah. Did you see? I mean, you're a lot closer to active duty than I am now. But I had a TSSCI clearance with CNWDI from the time I was 17 years old until 2015. So even after I left the Air Force, and we were very careful when I was a classification authority about classifying things. I made my folks take great care. If you're going to bring me something that you say should be classified, I want to see in detail why, because I'm hearing and I think I'm witnessing a vast bureaucracy of overclassification in order to protect something. And the something is a whole host of things like the institution, your job, and all kinds of things. And that's exactly the wrong way to go and leads us to the place that you're talking about with the F-35 or you name the effort, right?
Well, look at the classification authority instructions themselves are so massive that the reason we have overclassification is because when people transmit something via on the classified networks, they don't know the answer, and they've gotten it piecemeal from a bunch of multiple sources, and the actual originating classification authority is completely lost. But part of that is the nature of the internet and how data moves today and how much faster it moves today and the massive amounts of data that are moving today. The original classification authority doctrine, for lack of, and I know I got its instructions, but we're really operating on a 1950s doctrine in a new age world.
Right.
It needs to be redone.
Yeah, because the system's even being used. Even a simple email on an unclassified system is being marked. What is it called now? CUI.
CUI.
Yeah, something like that to protect the information when it's unclassified, and not even for official use. It shouldn't even be considered official use only. Quite honestly, if you take on the leadership of that thing, then you'll be a hero.
I'd have a job for the rest of my life.
Yeah, we're going to spend the two segments talking about your third area that I wanted you to talk about, and that is the acquisition system. Because speaking of the F-35, it may be great today, but it weren't great at the very beginning. I was around during all that fiasco, and it took 20-something years to get it to where it is today. And that shouldn't have happened that way. That should not have happened that way. So we'll be right back with Chip Whitfield, retired U.S. Navy captain. It's an interesting conversation, folks, an interesting conversation with great Americans that the rank and file want to serve with in the Department of Defense coming up in this Trump administration. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at WVWFoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
You've got a great Substack column called First Breakfast. Similar to what I asked Senator Cotton, if you could have a first breakfast with senators and government leaders, what would you tell them?
That, everyone has given up on communism, including the Russians and the Chinese, except for Cuba and the DoD. And the root of what the root of what ails us is monopsony. It's not the primes. The primes are absolutely part of the solution here. They've just said yes to what their one customer has asked for the better part of 3 decades. And what we need is not a defense industrial base, but an American industrial base. I want all of Tesla's advanced manufacturing capabilities to benefit and add lethality to the warfighter. And let's not forget, that's exactly what our adversary is doing. Only 30 to 40% of Chinese primes revenue comes from the PLA. So that cheap toaster your neighbor bought on Amazon is subsidizing lethality against U.S. service members. It is a whole of nation effort, and we got to get back to that. That's how we won the Cold War. That's how we'll win this one.
Well, as the Jewish lady, I'll just say amen and hallelujah.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Transition Tuesday, and we're talking with one of those folks on the rank and file's initial list to be a person that they want to work for at the executive level in the new Department of Defense under the Trump administration, retired U.S. Navy Captain Chip Whitfield. And Chip, I think you've been doing a little bit of acquisition stuff and manufacturing-based stuff as you've gone along in your life post-Navy, and maybe even a little bit on the staff before that. But that was Palantir's CTO, Chief Technology Officer, Shyam Sankar, and we're going to hear from him again in the next segment, too, because I think he's one of the key individuals. Once you get past Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and a couple of others, this man, he gets it. He understands it. The only people that haven't given up communism are Cuba and the Department of Defense. What does he mean by that?
Well, we're still using a central planning committee, and everybody is equal, and we've reduced it down to a very small or a very limited proletariat. At the end of the day, we're doing things in a way to acquire lethality that doesn't work. I don't know how else to say. People would like to blame the slimy defense contractors, but at the end of the day, Rob, they're going to behave the way DoD tells them to behave. I mean, if you get a chance to read Mr. Sankar's 18 Theses, he gives a great history of how we got to where we are today. The big primes, the 5 bigs today, didn't sit down and decide one day, wow, we're just going to eat everybody up and make this a monopsy, right? As Mr. Sankar refers to it. It's quite simple. They were told in 1993, all the primes, you're all going away. We're going to benefit from, we are going to recognize the peace dividend at the end of the Cold War now, and we're going to cut DoD spending by 67%. I think they called it the Last Supper. But as a result, everybody started consolidating. Now we have 5 big primes that do exactly what the acquisition world tells them to do. And that's, they should be doing exactly what the acquisition world tells them to. But the reality of it is, in that system, they forget who their customer is. I mean, if you look at most communist countries, the customer, they forget the people. The customer is the Central Committee. And what we're looking at right now is a lot of our defense contractors look at the acquisitions world, and since they write the checks, that's clearly the customer. Whereas even if you get into the acquisition world and the flight suits and the uniforms that are working in the acquisition world, they'll even tell you the customer are the men and women at the end of the whip, on the front lines, on the flight line, for lack of a better term. That's the customer. And we tend to forget about the customer in the system the way it's set up today. How do we close that gap? Once upon a time, it was referred to as a 3-legged stool, and anytime one of those legs is out of balance, so flight line or front line, acquisitions line, and industry line, and anytime one of those 3 legs is out of balance or off kilter, it falls over. And that's what we're experiencing. We're precariously balanced on 2 legs. And I think that a lot of what the CTO from Palantir proposes is he's not wrong. He's absolutely not wrong. We need to do things to re-inspire competition in the defense industry. There is no competition. Generally speaking, I think part of the decision in going with picking a prime for a product, pick your airplane, pick your ship, as they look at, okay, how do we make sure that there are still 2 defense industry-based companies that can do that, so we can say it's not just one company. I don't think that's right. There should be easy entry into the defense industry, just like it was. And I love he refers to it as the American industrial base, not the defense industrial base. I think if we can get back to that, we'll be good. I think there's some hesitation across the board. There's a lot of people that have been living in that world that went there wanting to change it, have not been able to change it, and now they've got jobs that are, with the rhetoric of the 18 Theses, are now worried about jobs and everything else. I don't think they need to be. I think most of them know what needs to be done, and I think this is going to be refreshing when Mr. Sanker shows up.
Yeah, his comment that about the American industrial base. We've been talking a lot about shipbuilding here in the last couple of months on my show with some folks, especially about merchant marine shipping and reestablishing maritime supremacy beyond just capital ships, because you can't deter China in the Pacific or anywhere else in the world without being able to actually fulfill the promise. If you had to go to war, in an all-out war with them, you have to be able to fulfill that promise instead of in order to deter them. That's one of the things we learned in the Cold War. And he talked about the Cold War, but it was our manufacturing base, not our military manufacturing base, but our manufacturing base that won World War II, because we had just gotten there, and it was across the board in every industry that we were able to convert manufacturing industries into military industries very rapidly, and build tens of thousands of B-17 bombers. I mean, over 10,000 brand new ones had to be destroyed at the end of the war, and those kind of things. That's how big it was. So he's exactly right. But how do we? And folks, if you haven't read it, you should read his article. It's called "The Defense Reformation," and it takes you to his 18 Thesis .com website. Where he steps through these challenges. And this guy's, I don't think he's a military guy. He's just an innovator that he's a software guy, quite frankly. But one of the things that he talks about is, and we'll get to it in the next segment, is what is the United States the overwhelming dominant force in manufacturing these days, and we have to figure that out. And we can't, and we are dominant in one or two industries. One in specific, we'll talk about in the last segment. But how do we get from 5 prime contractors now to expand that back out to an American industrial base? Because basically, what he calls the Last Supper, where the Secretary of Defense called all those defense contractors in. There were like 55 of them, I think, and said there's only going to be 5 of you guys after the Cold War ended, and we take the peace dividend. How do we re-expand that and encourage innovators to come back in so that the risk is low enough to where you can get capital investors to invest in it, and you have a pathway to success, because that's all people are really looking for.
100% agree. And you want me to answer right now? Because I would love to. I didn't know we were going to go to
go ahead.
commercial.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
You start off right away with one of the things he mentions is 5% of the DoD budget goes to combat commanders. Those men and women live on the front line every day. You give them a few $1 billion with no strings attached, and then you activate, you reduce some of the bureaucracy of the small business initiatives, and you let there are some incentives for the big industry primes to help those small businesses. You release those funds into the hands of the combatant commanders. You make it easier for entry for small businesses, particularly, and you also incentivize the bigs to help them and basically mentor them through the defense. What still remains of the defense acquisition community after Mr. Sankar gets done with it, and you will see rapid innovation. Admiral Paparo talks about the fight tonight in the Asia Pacific. We couldn't get to tomorrow. We can't get to next week right now. But he's doing it. He's taking what we have today and he's figuring out ways to do it. That man is phenomenal. I hope he stays the Indo-PACOM commander forever, to be perfectly honest with you. He's the reason I sleep well at night, because he's doing stuff like that and he's finding ways to do it. I would love to see our DoD give him a couple $1 billion just to go innovate with, and then cut him loose, because I guarantee you he would get small businesses that have the answers today and they can innovate quickly today. And he would probably help big industry do the same thing. I think you could say that probably of many of our combatant commanders. I happen to, have a lot of Navy experience, and whether he liked it or not, ended up being in one chain of command of his or another. So that's the first step. You do that, and I think the dominoes start to fall.
Yeah, because, when I look at it, I operated in the PPB system, programming, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system, that proletariat and centralized planning that you're talking about as the Global Strike Command's first A58 deputy responsible for pulling all that together and everything. And, the companies send their lobbyists in to the congressional representatives and fight against any innovation outside of what they think the DoD is asking for. And that's the description of what Mr. Sankar is discussing when he talks about communism is only embraced by 2 things, Cuba and the Department of Defense. Well, we got to take a break. We'll hear from him again when we come back to this last segment, Chip, and we'll continue this discussion. And it's because you are a Navy guy that I wanted to spend half of the show talking about the acquisition system, because we got to build ships, man. I wake up in the morning thinking about how can America build enough merchant marine ships in order to reestablish maritime supremacy, and we're not there yet. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show. We're talking with Chip Whitfield, retired U.S. Navy captain.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
So what are the mission sets that you see software is providing either a means of addressing or a leverage point that policymakers and folks in the DoD could actually use?
I don't want to be too reductionist about it, but I think what's really important is this elegant integration of the humans that we have with software. We can almost better think of all of the software as an Iron Man suit for the humans who do the job. As Colonel Boyd said, terrain doesn't fight wars, machines don't fight wars, humans do. And the OODA loop that he pioneered, observe, orient, decide, act, that's where I see the greatest leverage coming from software. It's not about the data, it's about the decisions. And so it's about wielding software to achieve decision advantage. Now, when you frame it that way, you recognize, of course, the concept of JADC2 makes sense, right? It's how do you integrate all of your sensors, all of your shooters to capture that decision advantage or information dominance? That's fundamentally a software problem. It's not a hardware problem. And then that allows you to replan how you're going to approach these things. I think that presents us with enormous numbers of challenges. The first amongst which is, are we even organized for a world that looks like that? In software, we have the concept of Conway's Law, which is that every institution ends up shipping a product, a software product, that is a reflection of how they themselves are organized. So if we thought about the DoD and the service level organization, which is sacrosanct, actually it's kind of hard to think about how are you going to achieve true JADC2 if everyone is going to be developing their own individual software. Like, we're going to, of course, get something that is reflective of the way we're organized today. And I think we've seen a lot of the success from the OSD level efforts meet that moment, but also it kind of runs counterculture to how people like things to be delivered through the MilDeps.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Transition Tuesday, and we're talking with one of the men that's on the list from the rank and file that's been proposed to the incoming Secretary of Defense's office and staff as a potential appointee to work rebuilding and restoring the Department of Defense to an organization that provides one thing: lethality for America. That's what the President of the United States is demanding. That's the incoming President, Donald J. Trump. That's what he's asking the Department of Defense to do. That's what he's asking his nominee to do, is reestablish the lethality of the United States of America so that our enemies wouldn't dare to attack us or even our allies, like what's happening around the world today. And my guest is retired U.S. Navy Captain Chip Whitfield. And Chip, I wanted to show that clip, number one, because he mentions John Boyd, and I have his patterns briefing beside my desk. I made all my officers in my flying squadron read that briefing, and he's the man that invented the OODA loop, as Mr. Sankar just talked about there. So I had to throw that in, number one. But number two, the point is, even AI and software, it's about giving the human being the ability to make a decision, to observe, orient, decide, act faster than the enemy is capable of. That's why it's called an OODA loop, and why your goal is to be inside the enemy's OODA loop. And if you're there every day, 24/7, every minute of that 24 hours, 7 days a week, then the enemy wouldn't dare attack you, and he's deterred, or she is deterred. I think that's where he's coming from. And the other thing is, that's where America is dominant in that industry, the software industry. He didn't really dive into it a lot, but that's a good starting point right there, because you've got the tools that we're dominant in, married up with a desire to marry it up to the humans instead of acting on its own. And we can win and reestablish our place in the world as a deterrent force instead of a force that goes out and fights wars all the time.
Rob, that's an excellent example, and it's also an excellent example where today's acquisition world clashes with what we need for the fight tonight and tomorrow. You talk about data is key. Data is king. In the current acquisition world today, I can tell you without question that there are companies who have positioned themselves to capitalize on that data, and instead of our government making that DoD-owned data available for companies that are licensed to work with the DoD, small businesses, et cetera, to access that data to work on AI for the sake of the military, or for the sake of the United States of America, for that matter. Once upon a time, stuff that we worked on for the military benefited the commercial industry just as much as, if not more than it did the Department of Defense. But that using that data to create algorithms and models and train them for service is key. I'm telling you right now, I think we're going about 5% of the speed we could go because most of that data is tied up in legalese in the acquisition community. If I let you use that data and you build a model, do I still own that data? Who owns what? It is a legal battlefield that goes back and forth with a few companies that are basically playing Cartman from South Park, saying you can't touch this. And they're using the acquisition process today to protect that, what would you call it, advantage for the good of the company, the good of the country, though. Holy cow. We need to open that up. Small businesses having access to some of those major just raw data and working the AI for the Department of Defense. Man, I can't imagine what we would come up with this for this country. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So the trick sounds like to me, not being an acquisition guy, is the prime contractors are open arms, more than willing to work with startups, innovators, the small folks and everything, and help bring them along. But it's the bureaucracy in the Department of Defense Acquisition Service that has to be deconstructed.
I don't want to say the defense industry they are still complicit, because I mean that database for the bigs that have the most control over it right now, that represents a business model for them moving forward to make money for, quite frankly, their shareholders. But like I said at the beginning, though, they're going to respond to being instructed by the DoD. No. This is the incentive. I mean, it's a carrot stick industry. If DoD and the country want them to behave a certain way, they will change or they will fail, which is the same reason. I mean, you talked about the Last Supper. The reason we have 5 primes now is because the DoD said we're going to have 5 primes right now. Okay.
Yeah. So let me rephrase that and see if I have this right now. What we need to do is bend the DoD acquisition bureaucracy to our will, so that the primes are doing what they are demanding they do, but not what they're doing today. That's really where we're at, and bend it towards what Sankar is talking about instead of 100%. Away from it. Because what he's saying is, hey, the primes are here. We're just responding to what DoD is telling us to do and making us do. Okay, well, we got hands in the audience finally. The audience has got some questions. So before we get into the show, let's go ahead and take those questions. Shell is our host over there. Shell, go ahead.
We have Colonel Gannon Burton, sir.
Hey, Captain. Hey, Colonel. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you guys for your service. Hey, talking a lot about the beeps and squeaks and the acquisitions. For me, it goes back to the first part of the segment in your story, which I am so proud to know you now, and I hope to get to know you better. I had to retire because the DoD tried to poison me. I mean, what I'm worried about here, we've talked about this with a lot of folks, and we have to be forward-looking, no doubt. But at the end of the day, the current leadership is responsible for, if I'm correct, still giving these mRNA vaccines out that are poisoning our troops. There's been 1,000% increase with heart failures among military pilots. There's been a 300% increase in miscarriages among military service women after the shots came out. And I'm sure you're familiar with Ted Macy and Dr. Teresa Long. And I'd just like to ask you, what does accountability look like when, in my mind, there's been this, complete and total dereliction of duty? And how do we restore trust and recruit people back and restore trust so that my son or my grandson can serve in the Marine Corps like I did, and like my grandfather did, and like my son did? Thank you.
That is a great question. As the father of 6 kids, I will tell you right now, it is rather demoralizing to know that I don't think any of them want to join the service, and it's because of everything that went went on. What does accountability look like? I do think that there's got to be some forgiveness in it, but it is very hard for me not to get, on the emotional side is, dude, you're all out. Go. Come through and lop off heads. I think there's some major I think in large part, our young service members today need to know that our flags in general, our senior leaders can be held accountable for bad decisions. Vice just saying, well, I was acting, I was carrying out the orders of the president. They need to see that, and it almost needs to be public. I'm hoping. I think that our accountability council is probably going to go pretty hard on that. And quite frankly, I think a lot of them have it coming. At the end of the day, though, accountability is personal accountability as well. I do think that they bear civil liabilities. I think they bear civil responsibility to their fellow citizens, even though they were service members in their charge. The reality is that the grossest infractions came from some of the highest levels. I mean, quite frankly, that you read Rob Greene's book, you can go down the list. They need to be. It needs to be a public accountability. I don't know how else we get past that. I don't think we can fire all the admirals and generals today, because quite frankly, I think there are some that regret the actions that happened. But I think what I said at the beginning is that you bear civil liability for First Amendment rights, particularly religious freedoms, when it comes to the orders you hand out. And if you issue unlawful orders, the Navy's not just going to pay the bill for you. You're going to be in straits. I think that's one way we do it. I don't know how else to buy it back other than to wade in and try and be transparent. We had a lot of transparency issues throughout the COVID and a lot of obfuscation. The fact that the medical corps is still pushing stuff, quite frankly, that's a reflection of the fact that we don't practice medicine anymore. We practice protocol. So that I hope that answers your question. It's not as big of a baseball bat as I think emotionally some of us want it to be, but the reality is we have to come out on the other end of this as a fighting force and not a bunch of folks trying to stab each other in the back and relive. I do believe myself as a Christian that forgiveness has to be part of it. I'm working on how to get there. That makes sense?
Yeah. I understand. I understand that answer completely because I've been working with Rob Greene and the team. I signed the DMA myself, even though I wasn't on active duty. But the reason we did that is because there has to be some accountability. But the pathway, I think, is going to be different depending on what level we're talking about, what the outcome we're looking for is, and that's why I started the show with the video that I did. It's about the humans. And as of a few weeks ago, I started recruiting out of my family again. And I'm a generational service family all the way back to 1775. And I have not been recruiting for the last 4 years because of this issue and everything. Well, Chip, thank you so much for coming on today. Tell folks real quick where they can find you on X and what the future is going to be. You got about 20 seconds.
Hey, I'm at Rich_Whit, WHIT X8. I've got 6 kids. There's 8 of us in my family. My wife and I've been married 27 years, and she's definitely the better half. Right now, I'm standing ready to serve, and if not, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing in the defense industry, trying to make that helicopter in the background more lethal than it already is, because one day one of my kids or one of your kids is probably going to fly it.
That's a matter of fact. Thanks a lot, retired U.S. Navy Captain Chip Whitfield from the rank and file list. Hope to see him serving in the Trump administration's Department of Defense. Tomorrow's Whistleblower Wednesday. We're talking with Juliana Tamarasi, and she is a speaker and writer that advances awareness of persecution of Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. And I know there's a lot of concern with what's going on in Syria and northern Iraq right now, especially, and Turkey. And we're going to talk to somebody that knows what the heck is happening and is an expert in that area. I'll see you then.